Welcome to Augmented Voices.
Yeah.
It's the show where we really kind of dig into the evolving relationship between, humans and AI.
Right, yeah.
And how we can kind of work together. Obviously AI is becoming so integral in so many different businesses and applications.
Yeah.
And so we try to kind of look at specific cases and break them down.
Yeah, absolutely. And really, I think what's so compelling is just how rapidly it's changing.
Yeah.
With our deep dives, what we're trying to do is, like you said, just give people a clear understanding of what's happening and what it means for them. Like,
Right.
How can they actually use this stuff?
And today, we're going to be looking at some really big developments from Microsoft.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're going to be looking at how they're really beefing up their Copilot offering with some of the most recent AI breakthroughs from OpenAI.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also going to be talking about, just accessibility and cost.
Yeah.
So Copilot Studio specifically.
Yeah, pricing is a big one. And that's one of the things that we'll get into.
So the big thing that really kind of, struck me was just how quickly they are integrating these really sophisticated ChatGPT features into Copilot.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be that there was like a lag.
Yeah.
You'd see something cool in ChatGPT and be like, oh, I wonder when that's coming to Copilot. And it felt like you had to wait a little while.
Right.
But now it seems like it's much more of like a shared pipeline almost.
Yeah.
Where things are just appearing much more rapidly, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, it means that Copilot users are going to be able to benefit from those bleeding edge advancements much faster.
Yeah.
So that's a really, really positive sign, I think.
Yeah, and they just rolled out these two new deep research tools, Researcher and Analyst.
Yeah.
And those sound pretty impressive.
They're pretty powerful.
So let's talk about Researcher first.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that?
So Researcher is really interesting. I mean, it's built on OpenAI's deep research model.
Okay.
But what makes it, I think, so unique and compelling is that it doesn't just search the web, which is what we're used to.
Right.
Like, if you go to Google or Bing, you're searching the web.
Yeah.
But researchers actually can tap into your work data.
Oh.
So it can access your emails, your meetings, files, chats,
Wow.
all within that kind of Microsoft 365 ecosystem.
So it's really like understanding the context
Exactly.
of whatever you're working on or researching.
It gets context. And so it can actually, I think, give you much more personalized, relevant answers.
And I noticed in the document, they gave a few examples of how this could actually be put into practice.
Yeah.
Like being able to help you kind of create a go-to-market strategy or to be able to identify new product opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, going beyond just searching for information.
It is. It's about synthesis.
Yeah.
It's about taking that information and turning it into something actionable,
Right.
that can actually inform your decisions and your strategy.
And this kind of goes hand in hand with what they were talking about with connecting it to other platforms.
Right.
Like they mentioned Salesforce, ServiceNow, Confluence.
Yeah, and those are just a few examples.
Right.
They have this whole system of third-party connectors that basically allows researcher to tap into a whole range of different data sources.
So you can really kind of build a holistic view
Absolutely.
of whatever you're working on.
And it can even work with other agents.
Okay.
So, let's say you have a sales chat agent.
Mm-hmm.
Researcher can actually work in conjunction with that agent to provide even more context, even more information.
So really interesting stuff with Researcher.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to Analyst.
Okay.
That seems like a really powerful tool, particularly for people who, are working with numbers and trying to get insights from data.
Yeah. So Analyst uses a slightly different model. It uses the O3 mini model from OpenAI. And one of the things that's really interesting about Analyst is that it uses what's called chain of thought reasoning.
Oh, interesting.
So it doesn't just give you an answer, it kind of shows you its work.
Okay.
So you can actually see the steps that it's taking to arrive at a particular conclusion.
So it's not just a black box.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of transparent.
Exactly.
About how it's getting to those insights.
Exactly.
Which I think is a really big deal because it helps to build trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it also allows you to maybe, question some of the assumptions that it's making.
Yeah, or understand the logic.
Yeah.
So you can say, okay, I see how it got there.
Yeah.
And this makes sense to me. Or maybe there's something here that I need to adjust.
Right.
But you have that visibility, which is crucial.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it can also run Python code for data analysis.
Okay.
So it's not just working with like basic spreadsheets.
Right.
It can actually do some pretty sophisticated number crunching.
So it's kind of bringing that, coding level analysis
Mm-hmm.
down to a level where, maybe people who don't know how to code can still get those insights,
Exactly.
which is really important.
It's democratizing data analysis.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge trend that we're seeing across the board with AI.
Right.
It's making these very powerful tools accessible to a much wider audience.
And they gave some really great examples of how this could be used, like taking a spreadsheet and turning it into like a demand forecast.
Yeah.
Or generating like visual reports and projections.
I mean, that's the thing. These are the kind of tasks that used to take a lot of time and expertise.
Yeah.
And now, analysts can essentially automate a lot of that heavy lifting
Right.
so that you can focus on the insights, the interpretation,
Yeah.
the strategy.
And it's interesting because I've been using ChatGPT a lot lately. And a lot of the capabilities that we're seeing in these new Copilot tools really are mirroring what ChatGPT is doing.
It suggests that those advancements that are happening in ChatGPT are going to flow much more rapidly into Copilot.
Right.
So we might start seeing features appear in Copilot almost as soon as they appear in ChatGPT.
Right.
Which, again, that's just a huge benefit for Copilot users.
And they mentioned that they're going to be rolling these features out to some users in April 2025 as part of what they call the Frontier program.
Yeah, so that's going to be an early access opportunity for some folks to get their hands on these tools and really start experimenting with them.
And the other thing that they emphasize is that one of the big advantages of Copilot is that it's so tightly integrated with all of your work data
Right.
within Microsoft 365.
Yeah, so, you might have ChatGPT over here.
Yeah.
Which is amazing in its own right.
Right.
But it doesn't have that direct access to your SharePoint files, your Teams conversations, your Outlook emails, all of that.
Right.
But Copilot does. And so it can really use that context to provide much more targeted and relevant answers.
Yeah. So it really is kind of like having an AI assistant that really understands what you're working on and who you're working with.
Exactly. It's that personalized AI experience
Okay.
that I think is so compelling.
So we've talked about some of these really powerful new research tools, but one of the most interesting developments is that Microsoft is now offering unlimited free access to Voice and Think Deeper.
Yeah. And that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because these were features that, were previously behind a paywall.
Yeah.
And now they're making them available to everyone.
So this is a really interesting move on their part.
It is. It's a sign that they're really committed to making these more advanced AI features accessible to a wider audience.
Right.
So it's not just about the enterprise users anymore.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that everyone can benefit from these advancements.
And it's powered by OpenAI's O1 model,
Yeah.
which is also what they're using to power some of the upgrades to ChatGPT.
Right. Yeah.
So let's break these down one by one.
Okay.
Let's start with Think Deeper.
All right.
What is the purpose of this tool?
So Think Deeper is really designed for those moments when you have a more complex question, something that requires deeper thought and analysis.
Okay.
So it's not just about, getting a quick answer.
Right.
It's about being able to really dig into a topic, weigh different perspectives, consider different factors.
And the document gave a couple of really interesting examples.
Yeah.
Like, say you were trying to decide whether to renovate your house to get the best return on your investment, or if you were trying to compare, different electric vehicles, or even if you were thinking about investing in a home generator.
Right. These are all decisions that have a lot of nuances, a lot of factors to consider.
And they take time.
Exactly.
It's not something you can just do a quick search and get an answer for.
Right.
So having a tool like Think Deeper could be really helpful.
It could save you a lot of time, and it could also help you make a more informed decision.
Right, because it's not just about getting information. It's about processing that information and making sense of it.
Exactly.
So, that's a pretty powerful tool.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about Voice.
Okay.
So this is a feature that allows you to basically talk to Copilot.
Yeah. You can use your voice instead of typing.
Yeah.
Which is so much more natural for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, we're used to talking to each other.
Right.
So being able to talk to our AI assistants is just, it's a much more intuitive way to interact.
And it also opens up a lot of new possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they gave some great examples of how this could be used.
Yeah, like practicing language phrases.
Right.
If you're trying to learn a new language.
Yeah.
Or doing mock job interviews.
Right.
To kind of practice your answers.
Or if you're cooking, and you need to look something up.
Yeah, hands-free help in the kitchen.
Exactly.
I mean, the possibilities are really endless.
And they mentioned that it's available on both desktop and mobile.
Which is important.
Yeah.
Because it means you can use it anywhere.
Right.
You know, you're not limited to just your computer.
So making these tools free to everyone is a really big deal.
It is. I mean, it really speaks to their commitment to democratizing AI.
Yeah.
Making sure that these tools are accessible to as many people as possible.
And they did mention that there might be some occasional short delays during peak usage times,
Yeah.
and that Copilot Pro users would get priority access.
Right.
But, that's to be expected.
Yeah, I mean, if you're offering something for free to millions of people,
Yeah.
there's going to be some limitations.
Yeah, but overall, this is just such a great move.
Yeah, it's a very positive development, I think.
Yeah.
It's going to benefit a lot of people.
So we've talked about these really powerful core functionalities that are now free to everybody, but let's move on to Copilot Studio,
Yeah.
and specifically the pricing changes that they announced.
Yeah, and I think the big news here is that if you're already a Microsoft 365 Copilot user,
Yeah.
a lot of the features that you would use within those Microsoft apps, Teams, Word, Outlook, those are now free.
Okay, so free as in included.
Yeah, it's like they're bundled in.
Yeah.
You don't have to pay extra for them.
So what kinds of things are they talking about?
So specifically things like AI-generated responses,
Okay.
agent action, so that's like, the steps that Copilot can take based on your prompts,
Okay.
and also AI-powered searching of your company files.
So if you're already paying for Microsoft 365, you get all of that included,
Pretty much, yeah.
which makes a lot of sense because they're really trying to get people to use those tools
Right.
within that ecosystem.
Yeah, they want to make it as seamless and integrated as possible.
Now they are charging for things like autonomous use, right? So if you want to build like an agent that's going to run on its own, triggered by certain events, that's where the pricing comes in.
Right.
So can you kind of explain how that works?
Yeah, so they have this new system where they charge in what they call messages.
Okay.
And basically, every time you use a particular feature, it uses up a certain number of messages.
This is kind of like a pay-as-you-go system.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's for people who are really kind of building out these sophisticated automations.
Yeah, people who are really pushing the boundaries
Yeah.
of what's possible.
But for people who are just using it for like basic tasks,
Right.
it's actually pretty affordable,
It is.
especially considering all the features that you get.
Yeah.
Now, the other interesting thing about the pricing is that it varies depending on the AI model that you're using.
Right.
So they have a tiered system.
Yeah.
So if you have a really simple task,
Right.
you can use a less expensive model.
Exactly. You don't need to pay for the premium model if you don't need that level of power.
So that gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of controlling your costs.
It does. It really empowers you to kind of choose the right tool for the job.
So to sum up these pricing changes,
Yeah.
we have a lot more free features for Microsoft 365 Copilot users.
Mm-hmm.
We have this message-based system for those autonomous agents.
Right.
And then we have the model-dependent pricing for the AI tools themselves.
Yeah. And overall, it seems like a much more flexible and potentially more cost-effective approach.
Yeah, especially for organizations that are already heavily invested in the Microsoft ecosystem.
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Let's kind of bring it all together and highlight the key takeaways for our listeners.
Yeah. So I think there are three main takeaways.
Okay.
First, we're seeing this really rapid integration of ChatGPT features into Copilot.
Yeah.
Which means that Copilot users are going to have access to those really powerful research and analysis tools like Researcher and Analyst much more quickly.
Right.
Second, Microsoft is making those core functionalities, voice and think deeper, free for all Copilot users.
Right.
Which is a really big deal because it really opens up those capabilities to a much wider audience.
Yeah.
And third, the pricing for Copilot Studio has been revised to be much more flexible and potentially more cost-effective, especially for those organizations that are already using Microsoft 365.
Right.
So those are the three main things that I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And it's clear that Microsoft is really trying to kind of embed this idea of AI assistance deeply into everything that their users are doing.
Absolutely. I think that's the big picture here.
Right.
It's about making AI an integral part of how we work,
Yeah.
how we collaborate,
Yeah.
how we make decisions.
And, it's interesting to think about how all of this is going to change the way we approach work and personal projects.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost overwhelming when you start thinking about all the possibilities.
Right.
But it's also incredibly exciting
Yeah.
because it really does feel like we're on the cusp of something really transformative.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with this. How do you think these new tools and features are going to change the way you approach your work and your personal projects? If you think about things like the ability to do really in-depth research, the enhanced reasoning of Think Deeper, that natural interaction with voice, or the much more adaptable automation that Copilot Studio offers, which one of those things do you think is going to have the biggest impact on your day-to-day activities? And more importantly, how can you start incorporating those tools into your routines to unlock new levels of productivity and gain deeper insights in whatever you're working on? So those are some things to think about.
Yeah,
And we'll continue to explore these topics as AI continues to evolve.
absolutely. It's a journey, not a destination.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Sure.
And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care.